Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 355, and today's guest is Ben Maitland-Lewis, Director of Startup Banking and Founder Success at Silicon Valley Bank. And yes, this episode is also sponsored by SVB. Ben and I go way back. His previous company, Pretty Instant, had a long-standing relationship with VentureFizz. This Y-Combinator company was an on-demand photography marketplace that did all of our office tour photo shoots on VentureFizz. It honestly was an amazing experience and such a great service and a great company. But even when you work with someone for a long time and you have a great professional relationship, there is so much about the person that you really don't know, and this is one of the reasons why I love this podcast. I learned that Ben's background story before becoming a founder is very eclectic. From living abroad as a child, to being a street performer and being in the circus, to playing music with an orchestra, and then being in a band playing the top clubs in LA, to playing drums for other bands like Incubus, Dishwalla, and others. I could go on and on, so I'm just going to stop right here and I'll let him tell his story in this interview. Today, Ben is still leveraging his experience as a founder, but helping other entrepreneurs in lots of meaningful ways at SVB. In addition to Ben's background story, in this interview, we also cover a discussion about making the transition from founder to employee, Ben's journey into entrepreneurship and the story of Press Kit, all the details about Pretty Instant and how the company got started and scaled, his current role at SVB and the different ways he is working with founders, some analysis and positive vibes from SVB's State of the Markets report, and so much more. Okay, a brief word from our podcast sponsor, SVB. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here is my interview with Ben. Ben, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, Keith. Great seeing you.
Oh my God, so great to see you. And I'm so excited to talk to you about your background. We worked together at one of the companies we're going to talk about for a long time, which was an amazing experience. So I can't wait to go down memory lane. But before we get into that, though, I thought, I don't think I've ever talked to anyone that's been in your shoes. So you're an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, and now you have this amazing position at Silicon Valley Bank. And, just thinking myself, I'm like, I've run my own company since 2002. I don't think any company would ever want to hire me. I'm not employable. So how did you go about making that transition from a founder entrepreneur to, having this great position at SVB?
Yes, thanks, Keith. I mean, honestly, it was a really tough transition. After Pretty Instant was acquired in August of 21, we were still mid-pandemic. I was pretty burnt out after 20 years of just being in the trenches and the ups and downs that come with that. And I also found myself as a new father, happily married. I was just in a different place in life. And so I started looking around for what to do. And the first thing I realized is that I had no idea what I would even do as a job title, right? I mean, what do I even do, right? I mean, as a CEO for over, 17, 18 years, doing founder-led sales, hiring, training teams, scaling everything out, fundraising, doing marketing, HR, I mean, everything. It's just sort of, where do I then fit in a specific lane? And also as a non-technical founder, as a creative problem solver, just give me a problem and I will solve it. I'll pull together the right people. We'll do everything. We'll make it happen, get it done. So to put that on a title was just honestly really hard for me. So it took me some time and figuring out, and I was like, would I do enterprise sales, and it was like, well, I didn't have that linear path of an SDR to a BDR to an AE to an, you know what I mean? So that was they're like, even though I literally hired and trained, 50 to 100 people, made the playbooks, and I knew that at the end of the day, too, I just really wanted to work with founders and continue to be in the trenches with them. But I didn't have this burning desire to start another company yet. I was still kind of transitioning to this new stage of life, trying to figure out what the world looked like. post acquisition and becoming a new father, um, that it was tough for a while because it really narrows it down, right? I want to work with founders. I want to be able to kind of add value here, and I want to be able to deploy my history to be able to support them. And then, I mean, goodness gracious, like this opportunity came about, across my desk, and I leaped at it. And honestly, I've been living happily ever after. Couldn't ask for a better place than SVP. It's pretty incredible. So yeah, I mean, look forward to digging deeper into that. But it was a tough
Yeah.
transition. I also worked with some mid-career transitioning groups. Like there's this Next community where this gentleman does really cool work, um,
Mm.
uh, helping other sort of mid-career transitioning executives get together. I obviously leaned on a lot of my old founders and my network, really good buddies who've transitioned from one company to another, or moved into venture, or moved into accelerators, um, and just so happy I ended up here.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a perfect fit. So we're going to talk more about what you're up to at SVB. But before we get into that, let's talk about your background story. So where'd you grow up? What were you like as a child?
Yeah, I mean, first generation born to European parents. My mom's German, dad, brother, sister, English, all the way back. I was born in Manhattan, lived there for a couple of years before moving to Connecticut. At 6, I moved to London, went to school till I was 11 there, where I did like 6 months down in Southern California because my parents have since moved down there. And then I moved to Munich, family sort of situations, moving out to Munich, where I was in Munich from 11 to 14. Uh, Obviously professional in the circus and all that other stuff there. We'll talk about that. But yeah, I mean, I was street performing in Marienplatz, and ended up jumping in and joining the circus. I was going to a music conservatory there and everything else. And then at 15, I moved to Southern California to Palm Springs to go to high school there and get into that, which is actually how I got stuck with this accent, because I had an English accent until then. And now I have a Southern California accent. And then took a couple of years off between high school and college because I was touring and doing a few things. And then I moved to Boston in 2002 to go to Berklee College of Music. And never looked back. Been here ever since, outside of about 2 years in the Bay Area when Pretty Instant went through Y-Combinator. But I decided to move the headquarters back here, and just because I absolutely love it. And my wife and I are actually flanked by like 2,500 miles in either direction, with family either in California, Idaho, or Germany. And so we're here by choice. And, we've built our roots here, and they're, as of yesterday, when we found out we're having another child, they're only getting deeper. So Boston is home.
Congrats.
This is the longest place I've ever been anywhere. So yeah, really happy
O-
here.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple times the words street performer, circus. So I'm like, I saw this like when I was doing my prep for this interview. I got to dig into that. So what, like what?
Well, I had a lot of freedom when I moved to Germany. I went to a pretty cool artsy liberal school, and my mother was there to take care of my grandparents that were unfortunately aging aggressively. And so I was just a very tenacious kid anyway. And my uncle's a pretty successful conductor out there. So I grew up with the music and the arts and everything. My mom was an art dealer. And I just got very deep into street performing, and I started to dressed as Charlie Chaplin. I would ride a unicycle, and I would juggle various different things. I would also create and sell juggling balls on the street, and I predominantly did this in Marienplatz. And as an 11-year-old, seeing my business was good. Let's just say business was good, and I was having a lot of fun. And the Circus was coming through. They're like the largest traveling Bavarian circus, and they were coming through and doing a performance in the Englischen Garten, which is essentially like Munich's Central Park. And I snuck into the back and was hanging out with all the performers and everything. And then they had ultimately put me up on stage, where I like juggled fire clubs for the first time and everything. And serendipitously, actually, my mother and grandfather were in the audience, and apparently they were like clutching each other, in nervousness. But that went so well that I ended up actually continuing to perform with them over the course of about 3.5 years, in between stints with the orchestra as well, because I was at the music conservatory. So I was really touring with an orchestra. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was with the circus. And it was a really colorful part of my life, that has continued since, right? But I think ultimately, the arts, hospitality, entertainment, creative thinking, STEAM versus STEM, all really kind of came out of those formidable years.
That is so cool. So cool. What
Yeah,
a
it
great
was a good time.
foundation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, and then, So from what I gathered, you studied business and entrepreneurship or music business and entrepreneurship at, one of the finest institutions in the world, Berkeley. So how did you get
I
your
lucked
career
out.
started?
Oh, that's a cool story, actually. So, I mean, while I was still in high school in Southern California, I was touring with a band. We were pretty big out there. We were doing the whole circuit, between, you know, the LA circuit, right? We were pretty high up on K Rock on the radio station. We were doing the Whiskey, the Troubadour, Viper
What?
Room, all
Wait,
these
hold
great
on, hold on,
venues.
hold on.
Um,
Now, wait, you said you were a street performer touring with a orchestra uh,
yeah.
in a
Oh, and then
circus, and now
how
you're
does
in a
that go
rock
to
band that's
that?
playing the whiskey?
Yeah, so I moved to Southern
Jeez.
California, got stuck with this accent, which is like, Southern California skate or die kind of a vibe, right? So, of course, I got more into contemporary, hard hitting music, playing drums. And I was playing drums both with my band, I was doing marketing and promotion, event, concert production stuff with other bands. And I ended up also competing and winning Drum Day LA at the Hard Rock on Sunset when it was still there. I played drums for Incubus. I played drums with Dishwalla, with LA Guns.
What?
And it was a
Stop it.
really cool time of my life. So I graduated high school in 2000, but I didn't start Berkeley until 2002. And this is where the career part takes off because I was taking that time off and touring. But when I wasn't touring, I was also a supervisor for Alaskan Airlines at Palm Springs International and doing all this stuff. Like I was just always very industrious. I've always had one foot in the creative and one foot in the business, always, right? My father, diehard music lover, very close to the Louis Armstrong estate, but like a banker, an attorney, and an intellectual, right? Very British, and my mother, just work ethic that you've never seen before, being born right outside of World War II and building that up and everything else, right? So um, I was just hustling. And if I was going to go to university, I was only going to go one, and that was Berklee College of Music. And luckily, I got in and I got a scholarship. And so I was deferring that for those 2 years. And then in 2002, they were like, "Hey, listen, if you don't come, we're going to have to, you're going to have to reapply." And so I flew out for a January semester. So going from Palm Springs to Boston in January was a pretty big culture shock. And I did that one semester, and I flew back 4 times to play shows during that period. And while I flew back, actually, my bandmates and everybody else in California, they weren't performing while I was there. Meanwhile, I am just in this amazing city surrounded by incredibly talented individuals from all different disciplines, right? I mean, you know how close knit we are. So, you had the music people, in at Berkeley, right? And the concern, then you had the writing people at Emerson, you had the super smart MBAs at Harvard. I mean, you had scientists at MIT. I mean, I was just learning by being in this ecosystem, and I fell in love with it. And I was like gung ho about it. And actually, at the suggestion of my dad, it was on the flight back that 4th time to Boston, I wrote the presidents of the 4 major record labels, handwritten letter, wax seal with the whole thing, and sent it to them. Snail mail. It works still, everybody. And I heard back from Siobhan Davis, who was the executive assistant to the head of A&R for Columbia Records, and it basically was a thank you for the note, but no. But she was British, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, where are you from? What brought you to LA?" And da da da. Turn it into a conversation. And then eventually I was like, "Hey, do you mind if I just come visit the office, next week or so?" And she was like, "Yeah, sure." So we set that up. I hung up the phone, borrowed money from my roommates and everything, hopped on a flight to LA, showed up with my portfolio of everything that I'd already done in a suit and a tie. And in the music industry, the only people that wear suit and ties are security and legal. But I walked out with a direct internship with the president of A&R at Columbia Records in Santa Monica. And I worked for him between my first and second semester in college. And then I flew back to start my second semester on full-time payroll with Sony BMG out of 550 Madison, running all college marketing for the Northeast. And then I stayed there for a number of years, ultimately becoming the East Coast marketing director. I have gold records for Modest Mouse and Lamb of God and Barbara Streisand and tons of artists that, I handled the marketing campaigns for. And that was really, and I did this simultaneously to being in college and studying, entrepreneurship and business and performance. And I also had an artist development management company at the time. We had 17 artists on our roster. I was kind of acting as a mini major between us and Sony. And all of that spilled into other certain career initiatives because it all fed into the mission of continuing to grow and build a sustainable career and continue to reach new audiences and launch new ideas. And yeah, I'd say it really started when I started working for the president of A&R in 2002.
So cool. That's amazing. Like, I'm learning so much about you that I had no idea.
Thanks. That's what's fun
So,
about this,
like you play drums for Incubus. I'm like, what? Like
Yeah,
what?
on their science tour, that was awesome. A lot of fun times there, and it continued to bleed in because I think there's a lot of parallels between the startup industry and the music industry. If you
Hmm.
really think about it, it's like, what is a band, right? It's a group of individuals that have incredible talents that come together, that complement each other. They put together a product, they put together a roadshow, they go out on tour, they release the products, they grow, they scale, they release new products, they iterate, they keep going, they connect with customers, and they build community. Ultimately, if they get an indie deal, that's basically like getting an angel investment or an accelerator or something like that. If they get signed by a major label, that's ultimately like getting signed, or getting investments from a blue
Venture
chip,
capital.
venture
Hmm.
capital, right? Everything else, and it's a business, right? And so, and you have to be tenacious and ambitious and gritty, resilient,
Hmm.
and so it was such a harmonious transition into tech, and it was completely by mistake. It was my intention of wanting to help, like basically go from a one-to-one to a one-to-many scenario of where I could have impact and lean in and support others in their growth and their mission.
All right. So how did you get involved in entrepreneurship then? Like your first company?
Well, I kind of, as mentioned earlier, I've always been doing stuff in that space, right? Either from a little kid, 6 years old, pumping gas or delivering pizza from, doing whatever, literally that early, to, making and selling juggling balls on the streets of Munich, to whatever, right? Even starting a winter shoveling business for 200 college kids, like called Captain Shovel, because my roommates were sleeping and I was up and I wanted to do something. So you're always building, right? But when it really ultimately got into raising capital and really really pulling together a mature company and growing, that was where we ended up building Presskit, and that came out of the sort of creative foundry we had started in Charlestown. We had 6,800 square foot space with a recording studio, a video production facility, ultimately a software development company, and everything else. And we had bands come through. We were doing sessions. Obviously, I was still in the industry pretty deeply. I was working with a lot of those alcohol companies to bring in additional dollars and exposure and allow us to do tours and get vehicles that ran on vegetable oil to allow bands to tour with and all these things. And I was in the middle of this. It was like the nexus. And we saw where artists were struggling to communicate effectively with the professional intermediaries in the industry, producers, agents, managers, labels, everything else. They were starting to do really good by communicating with their customers and their community because social media was starting to take off, right? This is 2008, 2009. And we wanted to fix that. And so that's essentially when we went and started to build Presskit. And there were a lot of lessons that came out of that, but ultimately, it was a great communications tool for individuals in the creative space. And so it included everybody from Red Bull athletes like Felix Baumgartner, the guy that jumped out of the space capsule, right? He was a
Oh
client,
yeah.
to,
Yep.
Grammy winning artists and film producers and actors and the like. And it was a great way for people to isolate their different marketable talents and disciplines to be able to get more business and ultimately build a sustainable career. That's what I'm into. But that was, that's how I got into tech. And I also, I failed a lot at that part. I mean, initially, again, non-technical founder. So what do? You hire a dev team and you ask them to stand this up based on what you want, and there's no agile framework, there's no flow of iteration, there's no feedback loop, all these things that we feel is so natural these days for the sort of startup strategy and the founding strategy of a company. I had no idea. I just wanted to pull together great people and solve a problem, and so lost a lot of money, but it was serendipitous. Everything, life is not linear, careers are not linear. My hope is that if you're a good person and you have your eye on the prize, like things will continue to work out for the best. And they did. We lost about $250,000 at the very beginning, working with a wrong dev shop and just not knowing how to build out a dev product, like an actual platform. And that's where we ultimately met our CTO, Doug. And I was with, and it was on a tour down to Austin where we had already organized multiple showcases, a wrapped tour bus, like to do this whole launch and everything else. And this is where I got the alcohol brands to come in to help pay for the launch, right? Because in turn, we would do distribution and exposure and everything else. We had a lot of different brands chipping in. but no product all of a sudden. And when Doug joined the team, he coded the entire first version of it on the bus down to South by Southwest, where we did the launch, and I've been in this space ever since.
That is so cool. All right, so Press Kit grew and ultimately was acquired by Universal. So how did all that come together?
Honestly, that was accelerated by us getting into Y-Combinator for Pretty Instant, which is a different story. But ultimately, we made a lot of mistakes at Press Kit, but that's okay. The founding team stayed together. It was myself, Chris Cave, who was my first co-op from Northeastern in 2007, and then Doug Rogers, the CTO, who joined, I think, in 2009 or 10 when we were doing that big launch. And we went on to start, 2 or 3 companies together. Once you get the triad together of sales, marketing, operations, and development, it's a magical thing. But where I made mistakes earlier in that space was actually bifurcating the ICP into 3 different areas. Again, I was a younger founder, first time in the tech space and platform type stuff. And I wanted to say yes to all of these different, user stories, let's say. And so we very quickly bifurcated into basically individual account type, platform offering, an enterprise, offering, which was for Universal and other indie labels and everybody else, because it allowed them to, just manage everything from a global basis across all their different subdivisions and everybody else. And institutions, we also powered Berkeley, Juilliard, USC, and a whole bunch with, onward mobility, right? They would provide their students with these amazing digital press kits, and then we built a platform that would allow them to leverage those to apply to get jobs after Berkeley that we had access to, right? Working in labels, management companies, touring, whatever. So as you know, and I know now, each one of those tracks has different needs, desires, roadmaps, everything. And so we were always pretty strapped, but we saw real use there with Universal, and we really solved a ton of problems. And when we got the opportunity to join Y-Combinator for a different company that the 3 of us had started, we chose to chase that. And so we basically split everything up. We sold the enterprise platform, which was very deep at that point, to Caroline under Universal, and let the kind of individual part of it just continue to ride out for everyone free of charge. And we just kind of let it ride out, and we sunsetted the institutional one because it was a really good opportunity for me to lean into what does it take to launch B2C, what does it take to launch B2B, and what does it take to launch and sell into institutions all within one product. It was probably one of the greatest learning experiences of my career that I've continued to be able to pass on to multiple founders to this day, especially in my role at SVB now. And so I don't regret anything, but of course, hindsight's always 2020. If I could go back, a couple things I would totally change and do differently.
All right, so that leading into Pretty Instant, that's how we met. So how did that
Yeah.
idea come to fruition and get started, and acceptance to Y-Combinator, what you learned there? So
Great story. Honestly, as part of Press Kit and working in that entertainment media space, I was also producing a lot of different events around town and collaborating with a lot of really good friends. It was a really good heyday in Boston. I mean, Boston as an ecosystem has only gotten better, but this was a really fun period. And we were doing a lot in the space, from TechCo parties to Techies Got Talent, talent competitions, and gosh, so many things. And it was what we called the TechCo party, and it was working with some of my old friends. A lot of them, it was Ryan Light, Jordan Flegel, Ben Carcio, Brent Grinna. The list goes on. If you remember that time, right? David
yeah,
Brown,
totally. Yep.
and we were producing the TechCo party, and which is basically at that time, everybody co-works, why not co-party? And let's get SVB as a sponsor. Let's get Google for startups. We got incredible partners there. That's actually as early as I started working with SVB. And so this is now 2011 or 2012, I think, or so. And we got, Bacardi to drop a bunch of money on a photo booth and some other sponsors and stuff to be able to have it as an open bar, right? Because people are coming. And we couldn't fit the photo booth through the front door of the venue. I mean, it's Boston, a lot of these venues are old, the doors are smaller, right? There's all these things. And so Ryan Light called me and was like, we have to figure out a different solution. We got to figure XYZ. And I was, it was almost one of these situations where I was like, all right, I got it. Boom, hung up, and then picked up the phone, and it was like Doug, Chris, and Chris Thomas at the time, our also close friend and producer and everything. Let's get together. And because we had the recording studio, because we had all these other resources in the software development company, we very quickly patched together a solution that would enable essentially the first roaming photo booth experience in the industry. And what that did, what that looked like for this event, to save the event, it was a point and shoot camera with an iFi card in it that would, when you take a photo, it would send that photo to a laptop that was in my backpack held open with a PVC pipe. And we wrote a script that would catch that photo on the desktop, dupe it to another folder that would add the branding of the event on it. And then it would sync through Dropbox to an iPad where we could then show it to the individual and then send them the Dropbox link. And so it wasn't instant, but it was pretty instant. And that saved the party, and it just like took off from there. Client number one, essentially Techco Party and our buddies, they were client number one, right? But we really kind of worked together to solve that problem and make sure that everything went off without a hitch. But then clients 1, 2, and 3, it was like Red Bull, NBC Universal, the NFL, Levi's, like it kept going and going and going. To the point where we had about 3,400 clients, nationally. We were doing thousands and thousands of shoots annually. But ultimately, we really led with that roaming photo booth experience because it was so cool. From a brand perspective, you could get the photo directly into your phone to be shared directly through your channels with the right hashtags, the right tracking, and everything else instantly. And you could push it to screens and printers and everything else. So you could move people around a venue, you could engage, you could do things. You could tie multiple offices together if they're not even in the same cities, because you could have simultaneous slideshows pushing into the offices simultaneously for holiday parties, whatever. That was cool. For nonprofits, it would fuel their giving, everything else for, experiential activations. You'd be able to sync and collect data and push out promos. God, it was such a great experience. And, for the customers, for the consumers, they felt like rock stars, right? I mean, they would get their professional photo taken, and then, it would be instantly pushed to them. And gosh, we did everything with huge celebrities and everything else. We also became a favorite with celebrities because we were private. We weren't the paparazzi. All of the photos, they knew that they would be theirs. It would get only pushed to them in their closed network. And so we were invited into all these things, the White House. It was great. But then, we got into Y-Combinator, and that was also just serendipitous. Like, we were doing an activation with WB Mason. We were at this conference. Someone tipped us off that we should, apply there. And I was like, why? We're here. We could do Mass Challenge. We could do Techstars. Like, they're our clients anyway. Why wouldn't I? And they're like, well, just check it out. And so I was at the conference with WB Mason. We were doing a bunch of activations, and I was managing it. So I was in the back. And I was like, I'm just going to get on this. And, the deadline's tonight at midnight. I'm going to do due diligence. Let's just do the application, because we were just having so much fun with this company. We were going from building and hustling really hard in one area to all of a sudden being paid to go out to these fun experiential activations, and being a part of the strategy. So applied, got the interview, flew out. Thought we bombed the interview. We were supposed to find out, I think, like 7:00 that night, and I think it was like 8:03, and we were just sitting in a bar in Mountain View, just like not drinking, not talking, and we just felt, deflated,
Did you have to interview Paul Graham?
PG was there. We didn't interview with Paul Graham. No, we interviewed with Paul Buchheit, Justin Kahn, Mike Siebel, and Kevin from SurveyMonkey. It was pretty intimidating, but also awesome. And but then we got the call, and we literally had to pack up and move across the country 2 weeks later. So that's why everything was very quick moving in terms of transition between press kit and pretty instant, because it was like the opportunity of a lifetime, and we wanted to take it. And so we were able to luckily do that, with Universal, with the individuals, with the institutions, to be able to button up, get in the car, and live tweet Oregon Trail as we drove to Mountain View, California, and went through YC. And, they said that we got into it because we were coachable. And I thought that was pretty nice to hear. Because as a founder, you can be pretty hard-headed, which is fine, because it takes a certain amount of grit and personality to push through with an idea. So you should be, determined. But to know that we were still coachable was cool. But it was NYC where we ultimately also pivoted to a second business unit of offering up photography across the country on demand with professional, vetted photographers and the whole end-to-end sort of process, which is very much how we operated a lot together too, where you could just book a photographer, they show up, you get your photos when and where you need them, Bob's your uncle.
Yeah.
And so this was during the Uberification of everything, and so we ended up
Right.
having like the Uber side of it and then the experiential side of it.
Yeah. So that's how we met because with VentureFizz, our audience loved to see the inside look of offices. And we're like, well, I'm not a photographer. I remember I went out, I went out to a couple offices and tried because my wife has a nice Canon camera. I'm like, "Ah, I could do
Yeah,
this." So I show up, I'm taking these pictures. I look at them like, these are horrendous. No one is ever going to want to look at these photos. So I'm like, what am I going to do? And somehow I was like, heard about Pretty Instant and booked a photographer, and we ended up working very closely with Chef. And
chef's
you
great.
guys, you guys hooked us up like because we always had like two or three people that were designated to our photo shoots, and they would go in and they knew exactly the aesthetic that we're aiming for. All of our customers loved it, and the audience loved it too. And the pandemic happens, and office tours aren't happening, and now they're starting to surface again too. So it's great because our audience does love these things, but we couldn't have done it without Pretty Instant.
No, thanks, Keith. I appreciate you. You were always one of our most valued clients. It was so fun to work with you. And that was why we existed, right? It was to sort of help individuals like yourself tell the story, grow the community, own the footprint, and be able to dictate the brand and style guidelines, but not have to do everything else. And
Yeah.
we were very fortunate to be working in terms of that. I would almost consider that real estate shoot in a way, even though it's not real estate. But your offices, all the WeWork offices on a national basis, other real estate, marketplaces where we, do all of these shoots. And it's so nice to be able to have an individual like yourself be able to dictate the brand, the style, and everything else, and execute on a national basis. So it was a lot of fun. A lot of learnings though from building out a marketplace and managing a two-sided marketplace and having close to 8,000 1099 contractors that are all hand selected, vetted, background checked, and everything. And editors that are globally distributed so we can keep everything moving, and clients that are both massive or small, and everything was as digitally transacted as possible with all the merchant services and everything else. But also that the larger companies demand long-term sales cycle, or not sales cycle, but payment, right? And all these things. And so it was it was such a great adventure. And the pandemic for us was pretty bad. Like we were growing and growing and growing, and we had gone through some ups and downs. It was a long road, but we were in it. And we had raised capital, we went through YC, we had great clients that loved us, our retention was super high, our NPS was super high. But March 13th, 2020 was D-Day. It just, everything came to a stop. We had to do massive amounts of deposit returns. We had to triage different sort of force majeure, cancellation, reschedule policies, and future credits. And we were mitigating ultimately state by state reopenings and photographer sentiment and client sentiment of the confidence to do out this or that or not and the other. And it was a challenging time. The pandemic, definitely knocked a zero off the valuation, which we've been building for a long time. But we found an acquirer in one of our friendly competitors, Snapper, which was also a YC company. Unfortunately, they were really only interested in our talent and our clients because they were very much of a B2C company, and they wanted to get into the enterprise B2B, which we had really cornered in the US market. And ultimately, but they were an Australian based company. So they were mitigating country by country situations versus us, which was like state by state situations. And we were just burning capital, furloughed staff, and, we're able to figure out a path forward that made sense for, our investors, our photographers, our clients, hopefully all of our clients. But they didn't do the interactive stuff, and they definitely didn't have attention to detail or the type of passion that we had with customer experience and leading and doing that stuff. So but that was the opportunity to close a chapter,
Well, so what
move
were
on.
your biggest lessons learned from running a marketplace? Because you mentioned the photographers were vetted. Like I knew these photographers weren't just some hobbyists. These people were professional. They had their gear. And I don't like you guys ran the editing, right? The photos would go
Hmm.
out, they get edited,
Everything.
and I would get my online gallery in your portal, and it was like amazing, 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 amazing. So what were your biggest lessons learned running that type of business and essentially a
Hmm.
marketplace?
Well, honestly, it was really awesome, and it's something that I miss to this day. I mean, even being at SVB and producing so many events and doing all these things, it's like I miss having it in the market because I would be our biggest customer right now. Lessons learned, I think, for there was to try to actually, I probably would have tried to pull ourselves out of that mix as sooner than I did, because there's two different things. There's your actual marketplace, which means that the sort of the producer, the intermediary of the marketplace, a la us, are completely outside of the transaction, right? You go in, you find the photographer you want, you book that photographer, you pay that photographer direct through the platform. We're not a part of it, right? We just never allowed that, right? We were very much, I would say, a managed marketplace where, again, you as as Keith would have your dashboard, you would tell us exactly what, when, how, deadline, and then we would basically leverage our data and some of our proprietary processes to invite then the top 3 or 4 photographers that match that based on location, experience, equipment, and personality. And then we would send those invites, we'd get them, then we'd manually add them to this and add them to this. And I think it limited our ability to scale faster. So I think I would, and now obviously, again, everything comes down to timing, right? This is 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, we didn't really have access to what we have now, let's say with AI and whatever. Like if we had now what we had then, we could have done some things to speed up that process, make it a little bit more efficient, and be able to step back away. So there was still a lot of wizardry behind the curtains that people didn't see, which is normal for early stage companies. But I think we were very protective over that human element of matching the right photographer to the right shoot. And even though we had tools and platforms and everything to be able to make that really fast and at scale and everything else, I think we limited the rate at which we could have grown because there always needed to be a human in the mix. Does that make sense?
It does.
So I think, but I think the quality would have suffered. So,
Yeah, it's catch
yeah,
22.
yeah,
I mean, VentureFizz is somewhat similar where it's, there's a lot of manual pieces to, I mean, there's automation, but there's a lot of manual of the content we're creating with our customers, right? So,
that's right.
but the quality's there, so it's worth it. I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and 42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, let's shift gears to SVB. So
Yeah.
you talked about how you landed there. So what are you actually doing? What's your role?
Oh goodness. At SVB, I'm the director of startup banking and founder success, which is just like honestly my dream role. Never even realized it existed. Here I am. And so that really means two things. It's essentially on the startup banking side. I work with some of the smartest, most ambitious, driven founders that are on a venture track and provide them with the banking services that we've been providing for over 40 years. They're built for founders. They're specifically there, very patient, awesome, and powerful. And really proud of that. On the founder success side, which is actually where I spend the majority of my time, it's digging in and helping those founders actually go to market, raise capital, scale, and ultimately grow out of my team. The startup banking team at SVB is focused on basically at the filing of your EIN, so you're talking like pre-seed and stuff, all the way to Series A. And so really, if we do our job correctly, we're in those trenches doing, go to market strategy, personal introductions to investors, founders, or, people in the ecosystem, clients, partners, talent even, and just helping them grow and, go to market. It's a really great place for me to be for sure. But that's what I'm doing here. And it's been incredibly rewarding. I've been here for just a little over 6.5 or so months, maybe 7 months. I've produced 53 or so events, spoken at conferences, one-to-one workshops with founders, like, literally coming into rooms like this and whiteboarding or, going to their office and digging into the deck and working on storytelling and unlocking the resources of the bank, right? Because again, I banked here for a very long time, so I was the recipient of SVB for a long time, and it was incredible. But now that I'm on the inside and I'm like seeing how the sausage is made and starting to understand all these things, I'm proactively unlocking a lot of the resources of the bank to help our founders. So that's been really, really exciting.
So, for people that aren't familiar with Silicon Valley Bank, like SVB, like there's a relationship that you have with First Citizens Bank. So, explain that.
Yeah, I mean, well, so when we were going through that transition in 23, we were incredibly lucky to be bought by First Citizens Bank, and I we couldn't have asked for better stewards of an innovation bank, right? First Citizens Bank is fifth generation, family controlled, 125-year legacy, private wealth, incredibly stable, and they fell in love with SVB and are investing in our further growth. And essentially, we're the innovation engine to their future wealth clients. I would say that if we do our jobs correctly, my hope is that those founders grow on to build wealth for themselves and will continue to get that benefit from First Citizens. But what's great about them as well is they're letting SVB be SVB, but they think generationally, not quarterly. And so it's really such a good place for our founders to be because um, we can bob and sway with our founders, right, and with things that are going on in the market and everything else, and really be there for them through the ups and downs. And it's been an incredible partnership that we're just really grateful for. And again, I'm also humbled because during 2023, 80% of our staff stayed and fought through. The average tenure right now of our senior leadership has been here for over 20 years. We have 1,500 innovation bankers, so we have like the deepest bench out there. When it comes to innovation banking and building, that side of the economy and supporting and backing ambitious founders. And so having a steward like First Citizens has been truly a game changer for us, and we're stronger than ever. Top 20 and everything else, and we're focused forward, and together we're stronger.
Imagine there's a whole portfolio of services that companies need at different stages, and what you're doing to help them with their success of raising capital, intros, pitch deck review, like everything you're doing. Obviously, the more that they're successful, the more that SVB will be successful. So it's like a joint relationship of success together.
Yeah, I mean, look, the vision of First Citizens Bank at SVB is to build lasting financial security that grows with the greatest ambitions of our clients, colleagues, and communities. And it's really cool to be able to work on that harmoniously. And it's soft elbows over here. It's one team, one dream, and I'm forever inspired. I will say, it's humbling for me, right, to come from the founder side of the table to transfer over to the banking side of the table. I laugh all the time that I'm an accidental banker, but truthfully, it is that. But where I get to sit is in the trenches with these founders, helping them. And we have so many products and services that are literally for them from the filing of their EIN all the way through IPO and beyond. And so the way it's kind of set up is that you've got startup banking, which is really where it starts, right? That's your pre-seed, your Series A, you're on a venture track. It's very tactical. We are leaning in, leveraging our knowledge base, our resources, our network, and everything else to be able to support you in that growth. Even put you in serendipitous situations to succeed. These are the events, everything else. Once you graduate up to our next team, which is accelerated growth, they can lean in very deeply with the most patient venture debt in the industry. Right now we've got like 95 billion in client funds and 42 billion in loans out, and it's the most patient. That's as of Q2 of 24, but it's the most patient lending there is and the most strategic, and there's still the 800-pound gorilla in the room there, and it unlocks so much value for these founders where they can also protect their equity and everything else and still access all the liquidity. And then they move to the commercial side, which is like, let's go. We're marching towards an IPO or massive acquisition or, strategic. And it's very cool. But in between all of that, you have our investor coverage team because we bank the majority of the VCs and funds out there. So, of course, we have super tight knit, with them. And we work together with them to help the earlier founders also get connected to all these investors and help put them together and continue to grow and unlock that value. And we've got the global fund banking team and foreign exchange and global gateway for if you're international expanding or expanding around here, credit solution. I mean, it's incredible. And actually, one of the areas that I've been getting the most excited about, specifically coming from the FCB side as well, is the private wealth. Because I've actually been pulling private wealth into the conversations with founders earlier so they can start thinking about their own housekeeping. Because truthfully and admittedly, and this is one of the reasons why I feel so happy and grateful to be in this position, because I can authentically and empathetically communicate with founders on what's up and everything else, is because, I've been there, right? I mean, I literally slept in the office for a couple of years. Nobody really knew it. I cashed out multiple 401ks. I've deferred, capital coming in. My investors are like, take this much off, for salary. And I'm like, oh, I'll take like a quarter of that so I can hire somebody else over here. And I was very selfless, and I was very proud that, everybody else was, getting married, buying houses, doing these things. That, when things like the pandemic happen and a zero's knocked off that, and then, when you've got investors, lawyers, you're kind of the last to come out of it. You're like, oh man, wow. And now that I've been working with the private wealth team and learning about what they're doing and what they can do when it comes to like taking advantage of tax, incentives, setting up 401ks and everything else, and helping you mitigate risk in certain areas, helping you hire higher quality talent because they would require these types of things in play, right? And saving on equity and stuff. I'm totally bringing them in sooner. And so we have this 360 sort of approach, that benefits founders and the ecosystem at large. And it's really incredible to be a part of being able to unlock that and then, bring it to our founders to help them continue to build.
SVB recently posted a report that is the state of the markets report. And I'm an optimist, so I love good news. So one of the key takeaways from this report, which I'm just going to read here: despite US VC investments falling below previous peaks, there is still more capital flowing to US startups this year than 26 of the previous 30 years.
Yep,
so
that's right.
I hear that number and I blame the media, meaning they look for sound bites, information. Like when you have like a year like 2002, I'm sorry, 2022, 2020, those were extraordinary years, and you can't compare that extraordinary year to what happened. And if you look at flow of venture capital in normal, good, not amazing spiked years, it's actually not as terrible as it may seem to the outsiders when you just hear all the media talking about layoffs and companies not raising capital, getting from an A to a B round is impossible, and like all these things. So this report gave me like good vibes.
Yeah, me too, actually. And it's a lot to take in, right? And we have just incredible talent here, right? That are able to generate these reports and stuff because we're in such a great position, right? I mean, we bank like 80% of the CNBC's Disruptor 50 list and 72% of the Forbes Cloud 100 list and 48% of the Forbes AI 50 list. And so we have all of this incredible data from the startup side and the motion of what's going on there. And then we have the majority of the VCs and funds. And so we have all this intellectual data that is very much unique to us, and then incredible people that can analyze it and project and do all these things. And I learn a lot from it every time. And, we're still in a period of recalibration from the last 2 years. And, we're seeing the majority of capital go to seed companies. We're seeing a diminishing rate right now of companies that are graduating from seed through A. And that'll probably continue, honestly, until probably the latter half of next year. And a lot of that is because of the recalibration of, companies going for growth over profitability and, not being capital efficient and, raising a absorbent valuation the last couple of years, but not really being able to back that up with the actual milestones and by hitting those milestones and traction, they'll keep up with that valuation, right? And so you're seeing this pullback, and yesterday, with the rate cut and everything, I think we're still all assessing that. But I think ultimately that's going to provide a net good for the venture startup innovation community over time, right? And so we'll see where that goes. But I'm still very optimistic. It's just, I think we're back to common sense growth, right? Because I remember with Pretty Instant, like we were denied capital from a number of VCs because we weren't burning fast enough. And that was so weird for me because I've never been in a space where I'm like, yeah, let me burn a ton of capital and hopefully I'll make payroll next week because some investor is going to give me money. I've always been like, let's build gradually. Let's get to product market fit. Let's make sure we can do X, Y, Z. And then let's raise capital to accelerate that growth. Right. And so now, and then over the last few years, it's been like, oh yeah, you're doing like, 5 million in ARR. Let's value you at, 100 million or more. And, and now they're kind of coming back, and they're not able to sort of keep up with those metrics. And so that's the great reset that we're seeing. But I'm very confident in the companies these days that are growing back to, being scrappy, capital efficient, creative, doing very unique go-to-market strategies and stuff. And the capital is still there. Absolutely. So you're absolutely right when it to an extent comes to blaming the media. We're also seeing 50% of the capital going to AI companies. And that's another area, right? Where it's like, AI companies are like, yesteryear's cloud. Like every company is in the cloud, right? Every company is an AI company, or technically an AI enabled company. And so, we'll see how that settles. But I feel good. And we have hundreds. I forget the exact number. It's definitely in the report, but I think there's some 730 or so, unicorns that are waiting to potentially IPO or not, and then once the IPO market kicks back up again, which I hope it does, that will then further flood, finance going to the earlier stage companies, which benefits all, right? So, I'm an optimist like you, but I think we'll just have to wait and see. But we already bottomed out, like last year. So we're definitely on the up again, which is really good. And so we'll see. But I think it's still going to take until, probably the later half of next year for things to really feel booming again.
All right. 3 apps you can't live without. Can't be Slack, calendar, or email.
Probably YouTube, Spotify. And honestly, I'm going to give a shout out and a hat tip to the old school GPS.
Podcast or book recommendation for founders.
Well, VentureFizz podcast, number 1. That's a pretty good one.
Perfect.
But if it's not that, then I personally like Stuff You Should Know is a really good one for people that are just interested in learning about broad topics, all of, in general. Stuff You Should Know is a good one. Book recommendations, God, I've got hundreds and thousands, but the one that comes to my mind, honestly, right now is called Sea Stories by Admiral Macmillan, right? The old admiral that was Navy SEAL who, took out bin Laden. He's also the reason why we have to take our shoes off at the airport after 9/11 and everything else. Each chapter is a different adventure in his career, and it's incredible. So it's just fascinating to read, and it kind of is inspiring at the same time.
Love that recommendation. I haven't had that yet, so I'll definitely check that out. Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great, information about the companies you've built, advice, and obviously what you and the team are up to at SVB.
Thank you, Keith. It's been an honor catching up and seeing you and being a part of this. And, for anybody out there that's interested in learning more at SVB, please have them reach out, because I got to tell you, founder to founder, this is the best home for you to build and grow your business. And I'm humbled to be here. So thanks, Keith.